Hey, welcome and thanks for joining me on this journey through the servant songs of Isaiah. We're looking at the fourth servant song, and we're looking at the fourth stanza today. Well, the fourth one is the last one. It's the last of the servant songs. There are four servant songs. And we're looking at this last one, and the last one begins in chapter 52 of Isaiah with verses 13, 14, and 15, and it continues into Isaiah 53 verses 1 through 12. And that the whole poem, or song if you prefer, has 5 stanzas, and each stanza has 3 verses. And today we are looking at the fourth stanza, and it is verses 7, 8, and 9. And as we look at it, it is dealing with the death and burial of the servant. And so all of the servant songs have been leading up to this. And the point of this one, and there's some interesting details about it, but the point of this stanza is the substitutionary death, the dying willingly of this innocent servant for those who should be dying. And that's the most remarkable thing about it. The most remarkable thing about the servant is that he willingly, knowingly dies in the place of those who ought to be dying, and he's not suffering injustice as much as he is suffering on purpose for those who should be suffering. That's the injustice of his suffering. So having said all that, let's look at some of this. Pretty cool translations in here. It's interesting from that perspective, but theologically and soteriologically, it just reinforces what we know of Jesus, what is revealed to us in the Gospels and the New Testament about his life, his death, his resurrection, his coming again. It just validates all of that for me, that this was written 600, 700 years prior to the birth of Jesus. And Isaiah, because God is speaking to him, I'm assuming by the Spirit, in vision or word, whatever that might be, he nails it completely. And so when we look at this, verse 7 opens with, he was oppressed and he was afflicted. And you run into, the oppression part is not hard. He was being oppressed. That means to put pressure on, to press down, and it has the idea of harsh physical treatment by others. But then you say, and he was afflicted, or he was being afflicted. And that particular Hebrew word can be taken either passive, the stem can be taken passively or reflexively. Reflexively simply means one doing it himself, or passively being done to him. And so it can be translated, he was being afflicted, and passive tense, would be afflicted by others, he was oppressed and he was afflicted by others. So the oppression is by others, the affliction is by others. But if it is translated reflexively, if it is to be understood as a reflexive, then the idea is that because when it is reflexive, it has to do with humiliation, it has to do with submission. It would be that the servant, while the oppression is going on, submits himself to it. So there is a submission that is involved. And either one will work. So it can be that he is oppressed and he is afflicted, or that while he's being oppressed, he is submitting himself to it. I prefer the second one of those. I think, to me, that fits with the parallelism and it fits with the rest of this stanza, these 3 verses that are involved here, that the servant would submit willingly to the oppression of others, and does so knowingly and does so willingly, for the sake of others. And so I think that's the way I go with it. But if you prefer he was afflicted, he was oppressed and afflicted, then that's fine with me too. Because the point is, the servant does not resist the oppression or the affliction of others, and willingly goes along with it and submits himself to it without even raising his voice, which leads us to, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. So what Isaiah is saying there is that a lamb that is led to slaughter doesn't know the difference between that, or the sheep doesn't know the difference in being led to slaughter and being led to the shears, doesn't raise their voice. And like that, the servant doesn't raise his voice either. And what that means is he doesn't resist physically, nor does he resist by shouting his innocence, which is remarkable because that's exactly what Jesus did. Jesus held silence. The whole travesty of the court before the Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin trial and the trial before Pilate, the Roman trial, even before Herod, he holds silence. He doesn't answer. He doesn't proclaim his innocence. He doesn't scream and shout, "Hey, I'm innocent," as he's being beaten. He doesn't proclaim his innocence as he's being crucified. He doesn't curse. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't proclaim, "Hey, I'm innocent. This is being done to me. This is wrong. I hate all of you." None of that's going on. That while that's going on in its oppression and affliction, he doesn't say anything. The difference is he knows what he's doing, and he's doing it willingly. He's doing it on purpose, that he is choosing to surrender to this for the sake of others. So notice also that when you're talking about lambs and sheep, you're entering into a sacrificial metaphor that is there. And certainly Jesus is spoken of as a lamb who takes away the sin of the world, and the lamb that is slain for us, the lamb that is, his blood is shed for us, this sacrificial lamb. And so you have that metaphor that is being used there. Now the interesting thing is that only a person can take the place of a person. So ultimately, while Israel is experiencing the sacrificial system that was given for Israel, certainly they were by faith resting upon that in that sacrificial system, in the shedding of the blood of the animals, there is forgiveness of sin, there is restoration, the fellowship is restored, that kind of thing. Surely they rested in that. What is amazing is that Isaiah, at this point in their history, and the exile of Israel and Judah, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, that in that process that is revealed to Isaiah that animal sacrifice, something more is needed, because what is being dealt with is the willful rebellion, the willful sinfulness of humanity. That willful, I will not bow before you as king, I will not bow before you as creator. And there must be some way to deal with that if God is to restore the right order of creation. And so it does no damage to God for us to rebel against him. It doesn't hurt him at all, but what it does damage us, and it does damage the result of that is done to us, our willful rejection of our Creator and our place on the stage of the world, rejecting that and claiming, like, I will be king and I will not bow before God. That whole thing, the Tower of Babel and all of that. We will climb to heaven. We will be God. We will storm the very gates of heaven, and we will become king. And that is what God cannot tolerate, not because it hurts him, but because of what it does to us, that damage that it does to us, and the consequent damage to creation. God's good creation has been disordered and brought into ruin and contamination. And in order for God to rescue that, and especially for him to have fellowship restored with us who bear his image into the world and to be his vice regents here upon the earth, something has to be done. And only a willful sacrifice can take the place of the rebellion, the rebellious will that we have. And so that's what's being talked about here, so that rebellion can be removed, hence the servant who comes and takes that for us. That leads us to verse 8, which says this: by oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living for the transgression of my people, to whom the stroke was due. There's a couple of ways to translate this as well. So the question is it by oppressive justice or oppressive legal treatment? There is injustice involved. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And I think it's best to understand it as by oppressive legal treatment. It's not injustice that's being talked about. It's the oppressive legal treatment that takes him away. It is oppressive, it is legal treatment that he is taken away. The injustice is that one is innocent and is suffering willingly for those who should be suffering. that he willingly does that. And so the other place of interest is, as for his generation, as the New American Standard has it. And that's perfectly acceptable. There's two ways of looking at it. It is either his generation or his line, as in descendants. If it is the first, the generation, then it's his contemporaries considered the servant cut off by God in death from the land of the living. He's cut off, he's cursed by God, and God has stricken him, which in a sense it is from God the Father. However, it is not because he deserves to suffer. It is not because of his sin. The second one is that the way I take it is that it should be, this word should be translated as line, as in descendants, because for Middle Eastern people, ancient Israel especially, to die without having descendants was to have no continuing line, you're cut off completely from the land of the living in that case. You have no descendants. And so that's what it's saying. He was cut off because he had no descendants, and he's cut off from the land of the living because he has no children. So that's the way I take it. As for his line, his descendants, we consider that he was cut off out of the land of the living. But in reality, it's for the transgression of my people to whom the stroke was due. And here it is the prophet talking about himself. It was because of us. It was because of us. We were due this blow. And that blow is the severest that you can have in the Old Testament. It is the equivalent with the New Testament second death, which means alienation from God. That this falls upon the servant, and it should have fallen upon all people, but certainly Israel. And either way, the point is that God, through the servant, rescues people out of that, and it falls on the servant. And then it ends with this, the burial of the servant. It says, his grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with the rich man in his death. And what that is talking about is that, and really it's kind of, you're trying to make sense of it, the New American Standard does it this way. And the reason they do it that way is because they don't think Isaiah could prophesy about the reality. And really what Franz de Lis said back in the 1800s is still true and about this, and that is, he was a German Lutheran scholar, never mind. What he said was, if you didn't have the fulfillment in Jesus' death and burial, knowing what the Gospels say about his death and his burial, you would have no way of understanding what verse 9 is all about. His grave was assigned with the wicked men, yet he was with the rich man in his death. With the wicked he died, and with the rich, in a rich man's grave, he's buried. The reason that he doesn't have a criminal's burial and he's not buried with the wicked and he's buried in a rich man's tomb is because he had done no violence, so there's no physical sin in his life, and secondly, there is no deceit in his mouth, so there is no inward sin. Now let me ask this question, and we'll be finished. Who has ever lived that could say that, or that it could be said about them? What human has ever lived that could say that, or have it said that they've been totally obedient to God? No sin is found in them, no deceit in their heart, no deceit in their lips, never told a lie, none of that. No human being other than Jesus of Nazareth, who is the manifestation of the second person of the Trinity, this living Son of God. No one could say that but him. He died for you and me. He suffered so that we wouldn't have to. He experienced that second death. He experienced hell. He experienced that blow that belongs to us, and he did it because he loves us. He was willing to take your place and to take mine. That's how he's with us. He's with us in the sense that he didn't deserve to die. What saves us is not his suffering and justice. What saves us is his suffering and dying for our sin. That's what saves us. And that grace is offered to us if we would simply believe in him. Hey, listen, I've got to wrap this up. We're going to tie it all together tomorrow, and then we're going to talk about it Sunday. I pray that you know the love of God. Because he loves you so much, he gave his son, Jesus Christ. You might have forgiveness of sin, eternal life, and joy indescribable. He took your place so that you could enjoy that. And so that you could have the shalom of God, the peace of God, the wholeness, the completeness to be made right. God's order put together in your life. I pray that you know that, because you can have that today if you would simply trust Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Hey, listen, I pray God's peace rests upon you always. Until we meet again tomorrow, shalom, my friend.